this will be a live stream, so thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Colin. Should I start?
Yes, please. Thank you, Christina. Good to see you.
Yes, good to see you too. Well, I would have loved to be there in person, but at least, this is a possibility for me to share some views and experience from the European perspective. And I will try and share my screen here. And the presentation. I'm just trying to ensure that it is in presentation mode. I hope you can now see it all. Right, so maybe first of all, my name is Christina Larsson. I'm in charge of the Orphan Office at European Medicines Agency. And please let me know if you can't hear or anything happens, then I will stop and we can address it. But if you don't say anything, I'll just plow ahead. And I have a very small agenda because I'm talking about initiatives from Europe, mainly from the European Medicines Agency, but also some other initiatives at the agency or in Europe, across Europe. So this, and I hope that you can get the presentation upwards because it has a lot of links in it. So all these are sort of links that you can click on and get to that particular area. And I will address most of these, not in the exact order that you see it on the screen, but the European Medicines Agency has quite a lot of various tools for not only rare diseases, but many of them are used mainly for rare diseases or orphan products. So it's a little bit like a buffet of various things to choose from. And I will start out with just explaining that certain of these initiatives and tools can be used at a very, very early stage of development, while others come in a little bit later. But in the majority of the cases, it is quite early and can reach all the way through to marketing authorization and even post-approval help for developers of rare diseases. And these, again, are sort of the various aspects that I will go into a little bit more in detail. I wanted to start out with our engagement with academia. And it's because it's not necessarily super new, because we have been engaging specifically with academia for many years. Even when I worked in scientific advice quite a few years ago, we had special advice for academia and special fee incentives for them. But that has now been more formalized, and since 2017 we have this actual framework to promote academia and to try and translate the academic research into actual medicines for patients. And this is, of course, also not only for rare diseases, but what we've seen is that the majority of the cases that academic research groups are working towards, and when they come to us, it's generally for very rare diseases. And what we have launched rather recently is actually a special pilot for advanced therapies with really a lot of sort of extra love. And what does this mean in practice? Well, we have selected, the idea was to select up to 5 ATMPs, and they have all been selected now. And they will then receive, the applicants for these procedures will receive regulatory support. They have a dedicated EMA contact, and sort of on an iterative basis, we can help the company and engage with the company developer, the academic group developer, to try and ensure that they understand from the quality development, from the clinical development, and to ensure that at the end, the data that is delivered to the agency for approval is actually something that we can use as well. And I think because there's a lot of steps that can be difficult for academic researchers to know exactly what regulatory standards we have and comply with everything. And it's also financially good because it has sort of similar fee incentives as if you are a small and medium-sized enterprise, in sort of 90% fee reductions or even no fees. So I'm really intrigued, and as we have chosen these 5, it will be very interesting to see how this goes forward. Apart from that, we have something that is maybe not focused on products per se. Yes, you can come with a product, but in general, this innovation task force and the discussions with the innovation task force are more related maybe to sort of diagnostic tools, methodologies, technologies, maybe types of clinical trial, databases. It can be some preclinical evaluation tool, etc. So the idea with this support is really that you have something innovative, maybe something that no regulatory, well, at least we haven't seen before, and you're interesting to get feedback. So this is very much sort of a brainstorming discussion with the experts from the network of the European Medicines Agency, from all the member states. So we try and get the ones who are most into this particular field, the one you're interested in, into one room, one meeting, and trying to give advice and discuss how this can be developed in the future, and guide you also sort of further, or the applicant further, what they can do and which steps they can take after this. This is really rather early on in the development, and very interesting, I have to say, to attend these meetings. We also have something which is very much product related, and it's called the PRIME scheme, or priority medicines. And the idea here, just like the FDA and Japan has as well, for certain products that you think are a little bit more promising, there is a big unmet medical need, and these products can hopefully address them, that they can be designated as prime products. And the benefits are that very early on, the assessment team, so the rapporteurs from those countries assigned, will be appointed very early on. There's a kickoff meeting with those rapporteurs as well, so they will know the product throughout the development, as opposed to normally when the rapporteurs for a procedure for marketing authorization sees the product the first time when it is applied for marketing authorization. So usually this is a meeting with the company and discuss sort of what, does the product have an orphan designation? Is protocol assistance scientific advice needed? Is there a potential? And they are all eligible for an accelerated assessment as well, which then may or may not happen. And why am I talking so much about PRIME? It is, again, not specifically for rare diseases, but if you look at the right-hand side of the screen, you see that almost all the products that have been approved under the PRIME scheme are orphans, so rare diseases. So this is really where companies usually can claim that there is a big unmet medical need. And therefore, I think it is a really good tool specifically for development of rare diseases. Now, something that is very close to my heart, because I used to work with this for many years, is obviously the scientific advice, or it's called protocol assistance for orphan designated products. So the protocol assistance is unique to rare diseases, while scientific advice is, but it's virtually the same, but it's just called differently. And the idea is that we give advice, the agency gives advice to get, well, the CHMP, Scientific Advice Working Party, gives advice on any stage of development. This can really be from nitty-gritty quality aspects before you start non-clinical studies and throughout the whole development, even after a marketing authorization again. Scientific advice can be given. It is mainly given by the agency, but we also have the possibility to have parallel consultations with health technology assessment bodies. And we also have occasionally parallel advice with the FDA. At those cases, it is not the letter from the agencies is not one, but I have to, because I have been involved in quite a few, having this discussion at the same time is always really useful for sort of getting one conclusion from both agencies in the end, and one way to work forward. Because of course, the majority of rare disease developments cannot take place just in one country or in one region. You have to find patients across. And of course, specifically for rare diseases, for orphans, there's quite a lot of fee incentives as well. So if you are an orphan designated NSME, you don't actually pay anything for the protocol assistance. You may see that on the screen, it also says qualification of novel methodologies. And I have a separate slide on this because a little bit like the Innovation Task Force, it's not also possible to get a qualification for what in the beginning we thought were going to be sort of biomarkers. So if you are developing a targeted product, for example, and you want to have a diagnostic tool for that, then you can come for qualification of that particular novel methodology. But we've seen that this has now been much, much broader, and various methodologies can be qualified. You can, for example, qualify a patient-reported outcome tool. And usually this is quite early. We publish all the qualifications on the website, but it's not always that it actually results in a qualification, because maybe something needs to be done. And therefore, we also have the possibility of having a qualification opinion and sort of a letter of support as well. So the agency will say, yes, this looks very promising. However, a few more things might be needed for the actual development. So if you're interested, all the qualifications are found on the website. And again, I guess those are also not necessarily only rare, but you will see if you look into them that the majority of cases actually relate to rare diseases. So I also wanted to, so that's what at the agency takes place. There are other things, of course, as well, but those are the ones I really thought were most important. And across Europe, there is a lot taking place. And only some of it is sort of course, centralized, but I've had many meetings and heard a lot of things going on locally, nationally, but also some across Europe. So I wanted to mention a few, which the agency per se is not necessarily part of. Sometimes we contribute, but it is not organized by us. And one of the really big things right now is what's called the European Partnership on Rare Diseases. And you can see that it's really prospective. So this is not something that is in one way specific for rare diseases, because these European partnership exists for many different type of areas. So it could be, I don't know, shipping or agriculture, for example. But in this particular case, it's focused specifically, this one's focused specifically on rare diseases. And this is really a partnership. So it's not the European Commission deciding exactly what is going to happen, but the various member states of the European Union have to come together. And the idea is sort of to pool resources and ideas in a European research program, sort of. And of course, the goal is then to improve patients' life, patients with rare diseases, mainly, yes, to be able to diagnose them, for treatments, and also very much multidisciplinary research. This is a call, and it actually ends on the 19th of September. So the submission deadline for all the ones who want to participate is until the 19th of September, so very, very close. And right now, a strategic and innovation research agenda is being developed by a lot of experts from across Europe, contributing to objectives and ideas, aims, goals for what this agenda should look like and what are we going to put our resources into, efforts into. So this is not only pharmaceutical development, for example, but one thing that I think personally is important is also the education of developers, so ensuring that already at the research stage, everybody knows that if I want a product to come to a patient, there are certain steps I have to go through. So it's very interesting. We don't have it yet. As you see, the deadline is next week. And the research agenda is also currently being developed, but I'm sure that by the end of the year, I guess it should be published. So keep an eye out for this if you're interested. I also wanted to mention the European reference networks on rare diseases. And these are 24 networks, various type of rare diseases grouped, in order to try and get researchers, physicians treating, nurses as well, but everybody treating patients together and in a network in Europe. For example, from the north of Sweden, where I come from, liaising with someone from the south of Spain. And this is possible in this network. And together in this network, there is also this rare disease coordination and support action to try and create a platform for all of these groups to have research and innovation together. And there is work packages, seven work packages. I only listed 6, as you can see on the screen, because one is sort of more the collaboration part. But it is really interesting trying to get people working together, trying to harmonize data collection, for example. You know, how do you collect the data, ensuring that patients in Sweden and in the south of Spain can be maybe compared in clinical trials, maybe they can be put in clinical trials together. So it's very encouraging, really, really interesting. It's a very vibrant group of people as well, the ones I have met so far, and very engaged. So there's definitely huge hopes, and I hope that patients will really benefit from this as well. Last but not least, I just wanted to mention a few of the innovative medicines initiatives that are specifically relating to rare diseases. And the first one on the screen here, the Screen for Care, is specifically to shorten the time for diagnosis. And actually, it was quite high tech, because it's not only sort of newborn screening, but they're also looking into various type of artificial intelligence to screen electronic health records in order to try and, but with the information from the health records, try and identify patients with a specific rare disease. So very interesting. We also have the RDCA-DAP. Well, it's also trying to speed up development for advanced treatments. I find the EU Pearl quite interesting, because it tries to get patients much more into clinical trials, and making the trials more efficient and patient-friendly. And they try and set up this clinical trial platform, so you can have multiple companies and multiple candidate drugs simultaneously, which turns out maybe not always so easy for a single company to do, but with this consortia, maybe it will be possible. It would definitely, I think, help patients, and they're very much part of it as well. And the last one I just wanted to mention for the IMI projects is this Connect for Children, which is a very large collaborative European network aiming to do clinical trials for pediatric populations. And there, of course, the majority are also rare. And there's both public and private partners in this, and they have more than 400 experts across Europe trying to identify and decide how to best do a clinical trial. It's a little bit like a one-stop shop. You can come to this group, that's the idea in the future at least, to come to the group, and they're piloting this and asking for help, asking for people to collaborate with, trying to define endpoints, trying to ensure that the best clinical trials are done, and ensuring that the patients get the most out of the clinical trials that are being done. So yeah, there's really a lot going on, and I only scratched the surface. There's loads more, but maybe for this morning, this will suffice. And there is a lot more interesting links if you wanted to have a look afterwards. And with that, I thank you very much, and will hand over to Andrew, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Fiona, you go next. We'll take questions at the end.
Okay, I'll go first, and then Andrew's going to follow. Thank you so much. It was really interesting for me to hear everything going on at the EMA as well. Now, Tanya, are you going to share the slides for us this morning? Or should I do that?
I'll bring them up, Fiona. I've got them right here.
Oh, thank you so much. So while we're getting set up here, I'll introduce myself. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting us. I know it's hard virtually, but we're happy to participate. So thank you even for a virtual invitation. My name is Fiona Frappier. I am a manager in the Biologics and Radiopharmaceuticals Drugs Directorate. This is part of Health Canada's regulatory branch, and I focus on rare diseases. And so that is my introduction this morning. Andrew, who I'll let present about halfway through, is a manager in the strategic policy branch and actually has a whole new national strategy on rare diseases. And so you'll hear both from the regulator today as well as from our policy, our strategic policy branch. All right, next slide. I think to begin is really to look at, a lot of the trends we're seeing, they're not national in nature, they're actually international. And so we're seeing every year more and more new active substances for rare diseases. It's basically half of new active substances every single year in Canada and elsewhere. We expect this to be a growing trend, partly because of how many new technology platforms are coming out, which are helpful to address rare diseases, but also our advancement in pathophysiology knowledge of existing therapies and diseases available. I think we've heard many times pediatric drugs continues to be an issue, in Canada as well as internationally. In Canada, most children do receive off-label prescriptions. We would like to address this, and that's going to require some continued clinical trials and innovation. We've also seen some great advancements in gene therapies. This is something that's been ongoing, of course, for 30 years, but as the learning increases, we're actually advancing some of the complexity of the questions that we're asking, and a lot of new data needed to address them. All right, next slide, please. So how do we tackle this in Canada? I think is pretty direct. We have, first of all, of course, clinical trials. In Canada, it's very simple to start launching a clinical trial. It's a 30-day no objection letter application. And so I would like to encourage everyone in the audience who's running a trial, in the United States or in another country, to open a second site or an additional site in Canada. About 30% of trials in Canada are global in nature. and we welcome that. You can come in for protocol assistance. This is in the form of what we call a pre-CTA meeting, so a pre-clinical trial application meeting, and we can ask quality questions, clinical questions, and it can happen at multiple junctures as you come in for each additional phase of trial development. Once those trials are ongoing, we do like to see them registered. And so most Canadian trials are actually registered on the NIH site as well for clinicaltrials.gov, as well as the WHO site. We have a clinical trial database. I think this is very important to make sure we're leveraging the studies that are ongoing already and that we're making best use of those patient populations, and maybe where possible, even leveraging control groups. And so this becomes strategic in nature for us. Once we have data packages ready and we want to come for new drug submissions, it's a 300-day review pathway. Most rare diseases actually apply for 2 of our accelerated review pathways, though, and so I've highlighted those here for us today. The first is the priority review, and this is where we're really seeing substantive data, looking at an advancement over what is already on the market, or where there is no drug available for a severe condition. The other one I would draw our attention to for rare diseases, and we don't do a lot of these, we do about 3 or 4 a year. They're called Notice of Compliance with Conditions. They're almost always for rare diseases. And this is where we're seeing promising evidence. And so it is often coming in with one strong phase 3 trial where we agree that the data is strong enough to authorize the product, and then we offer a condition for a follow-up confirmatory study after the product is actually marketed. And so this can be submitted 2 or 3 years later to confirm the original promising results and further characterize the product. The package does need to be strong, of course, but for rare diseases, I think it is acknowledging that the evidence will be different than in some of the larger disease structures. And then the other pathway is called Special Access Program, and this is essentially a release program. It is very specific, and so a physician would apply on behalf of one patient for a release of a product that's not already on the market in Canada. They would need to submit evidence. It could be journal publications, it could be, early in its nature, but this would be, again, for someone who's really facing some serious, life-threatening, no alternative situation where we think there might be something promising in development. And normally this special access program would only be a release onto the market, and so it would be a right to import. We've also developed within this something we call the OLIP program, and so this is an open label individual patient study, and it's intended to bridge the gap on some of the evidence needs for this program. And so this would be not only the release, but actually a small clinical trial, N of 1, maybe up to N of 10, to look at further characterizing why this would be appropriate in this disease condition. This can happen for quite a number of very rare diseases where they're looking for an advancement on a small level. All right, next slide. This leads us to our international collaborations. Canada is a small market. It's about 4% of global pharmaceutical sales. It's also about 4% of clinical trials, so that lines up. We work very hard with our international partners to make sure that we're coming up with regulatory strategies that are, enabling and aligned and offer, supportive metrics. And so the main way we do that is with the ICMRA. This is the International Coalition of Medicines and Regulatory Authorities. This is representing, I think, 60 plus countries. I've lost track of the exact number, and their regulatory agencies. We also work with, of course, PAHO and the WHO and their biologic standards groups, as well as the regulatory groups. But we also look at ways to align some of our regulatory work, and this can be internationally through parallel reviews or information sharing. with the EMA or the FDA, also with our Access Consortium, which is with Singapore, the UK, Switzerland, Canada, and Australia. These are all kind of small, medium-sized markets where you can, as a sponsor, come in with one application and go through a parallel review. We would all have independent reviews within our own structures, but we would try and mitigate some of the regulatory questions and advance in a coordinated way, so it would reduce the burden on the sponsor. There's also some collaborative review programs through EMA Open, which is focused primarily on COVID, but is now expanding, as well as the FDA Project Orbis, which is focused on oncology, which is about 50% of rare disease new active substances in Canada every year. Also within this, there's a focus on post-market monitoring. And so a lot of rare disease products do come in with packages that require ongoing data support once they are on the market. And so it's important for us to think about strategic ways to leverage that data nationally and internationally to make sure that we're monitoring all of the best data available. All right. Which leads us to real-world evidence. We do real-world evidence primarily on the post-market, actually, but we're starting to explore how we can best advance it on pre-market strategies. And I think this, for you, will be very familiar. It's really ensuring that it's grounded in data integrity principles, which would apply to any data package that's being developed. But we've looked at ways to create position papers, guidance documents, and really some key instructions on how to optimize that in a way that will lead to stronger, more reliable data sets as they come in to support endpoints or supplementary endpoints for new packages. Next slide, please. And then within this, we're actually in an innovation cycle. In 2019, the government came out with a large budget announcement on health and biosciences and looking at novel ways that we can increase biomanufacturing in Canada, but also ways in which the regulator can improve its approaches. And so there's been 4 key pillars for this, all of which would apply to rare diseases, actually. So modernizing clinical trials. This is looking at how do we better enable decentralized trials? How do we make sure that we're improving monitoring and data collection? We are also looking at enabling advanced therapeutic products. And this is a bit of a sandbox approach for the regulator. And so when we're really looking at exceptionally innovative approaches, maybe cell-embedded medical devices that would then be implanted in organs, that we're creating regulatory clarity on what we would need to see to advance these products through to the market. And so these products can come in and receive kind of a white glove concierge service that will help enable them through those more complex regulatory packages. We're also looking at agile licensing for drugs. And so this is looking at enabling life cycle management through rolling submissions, as well as terms and conditions, and ensuring that we're modernizing our concepts on risk management plans as well for marketed products. And then lastly, but importantly for rare diseases, when we think of diagnostics, we also want to make sure that we're using agile licensing for medical devices and advancing our regulatory pathways. And so this is a 5-year program to review and update all of these regulatory mechanisms. The other very important piece I would like to bring up, and I think many of you already know this, but it's looking at transparency in communicating with all of our health system stakeholders. And so we do this in many different ways online. The first is our submissions under review. We often get asked, we hear the FDA is reviewing this new product, are you reviewing it as well? So all of this is published online. It's on our database called Submissions Under Review, and people can find the date it was submitted to us, what the actual indication was that's being asked for, and track it, in real time. We also publish the regulatory decision summaries, and this is where we can look at the technical advice once that's come in. So what is the clinical basis of decision, as well as the quality review for that product. We also offer a higher level summary called a summary basis of decision. This is meant for a broader audience where we can look at what was, the inclusion criteria, the exclusion criteria. Why does this indication come through the way it did? And then within this, you can always look up through our drug product database, what are all of the marketed products in Canada? What is the indication that it's authorized for? We do see quite a bit of off-label prescribing in the rare disease space. This is normal, but we would like to see some advancement on improving labels where possible. And then lastly, we also do a clinical release of the information. And so this is the clinical data that was reviewed to support the package gets released as part of our public release of clinical information. And it's an online portal. This is done in collaboration with the companies themselves. And actually it should support further advancement of our understanding of clinical packages and what can be done for next drugs as well. And I think with this, I hand it over to Andrew to talk about our national strategy on drugs, and we'll take questions afterwards. Over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona. So my name is Andrew Taylor, and Fiona works in our regulatory side, looking at the safety and effectiveness of drugs or efficacy of drugs. And then I'm over in the more strategic policy branch side. So I'm looking at pharmaceutical policy writ large. And so I'll talk a little bit about a recent strategy that we've released related to drugs for rare diseases and trying to support various aspects of their development and getting access to patients. So you probably know this already, but Canada has a complex pharmaceutical management system. Fiona's talked quite eloquently about what Health Canada does for authorizing drugs for sale, looking at whether a drug is safe and of suitable quality, and making sure that it's not of excessive price through our patented medicine prices review board as well. But there are other aspects within the system. There's other decision making. There's other data needs. So we also have a health technology assessment body working at the national level and in the province of Quebec, looking at evaluating the clinical benefit and the cost of drugs, trying to get a sense of cost effectiveness and value for money. We also have a Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance that is a collaboration of provinces and territories working with manufacturers to negotiate prices that are more accessible for the system and for sustainability of providing care to patients. And then following this HTA and pricing negotiation work, drug plans typically then make the decision about whether to list a drug on their formulary. And in Canada, we have both public programs through our provinces and territories, as well as private plans, and each is making decisions a little bit differently. So this can create a postal code lottery, if you will, in Canada, where based on which jurisdiction you live, on which kind of access to private or public plans you have, patients have varying access to drugs for rare diseases. And we heard that that's a major issue that needs to be addressed. So the culmination of this was really a broader advisory council on the implementation of pharmacare generally in Canada. And they noted the importance and the need to develop a strategy specifically for drugs for rare diseases, not just because of the cost associated with it, but because of that postal code lottery and varying decision-making across the country. So in budget 2019, the government allocated what is essentially $500 million a year to support a strategy to try to improve access for patients. So starting in December 2020, the federal government came together with our provincial and territorial colleagues, established a working group and tried to look towards how we could develop a national strategy for Canada and how we could build more consistency within decision making. So we held broad stakeholder engagement between 2021 and 2022, supplementing the work that we were doing in provinces and territories, reaching out to manufacturers, hopefully many of you here today, researchers, patients, of course, clinicians, and other types of people with a stake in trying to improve the situation. And we have a what we heard report and various discussion pieces that sort of support our thinking on that strategy. But ultimately, the culmination of that work and that consultation, there was a vision and a series of pillars that really emerged from that work. And really it's focused and the linchpin of it is providing better access to effective drugs and thereby supporting better health outcomes for patients in Canada. So we're guided by 4 pillars that really focus on patient outcomes and sustainability for the system writ large, working towards national consistency and trying to make sure that people have the same access no matter where they live across the country. Investing in innovation and research, because we know that that is super important for the rare diseases where we still don't know a lot about natural history of the disease or even have health products available to treat those that are living with those conditions. And also understanding the importance of data infrastructure and supporting the collection and use of evidence, which my colleague at the EMA spoke eloquently to as well earlier. So ultimately, this framework really led to the announcement of our strategy back in March 2022. And we've tried to have a series of activities associated with these various pillars. So to support patient outcomes and sustainability, we're working with our provinces and territories as well as Indigenous Services Canada at the federal level to make sure that we're improving access to new and emerging drugs, those drugs that are potentially challenging the system, either because of cost pressures or because of a new way of doing things and a need for better harmonization and standards and access across the country. But we also know that we need to enhance the existing drugs that are already on public formularies to try to make sure that each formulary is brought up to a minimum standard and that there's better access across the country. But we also know beyond drugs, enhancing screening and diagnosis was mentioned as a major issue during our consultation work, making sure that we're applying novel approaches to screening and diagnostics and helping to get patients earlier access when needed. So we're currently working with our provinces and territories to create agreements to support these 3 areas in the effort to support better patient outcomes. And then to seek national consistency, we're establishing a few governance structures at the national level. So we're continuing the working group in a more formalized way with our provinces and territories, but also implementing or establishing an implementation advisory group. And so this is a way for us to continue to work with and consult with patients, manufacturers, private insurers, and other types of stakeholders that worked with us during the consultation work to develop the initial framework for the strategy. But these last 2 areas are what I'd like to talk a little bit more about. I think what you'll be most interested in, which is what we're doing to improve the collection and use of evidence. So we're working with our partner agencies, our health technology assessment body in Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technology and Health, and one of the major data institutions that holds a range of administrative databases in Canada, the Canadian Institute for Health Information. But then we're also working with our national research body, the Canadian Institute for Health Research, to advance a rare disease research agenda. And so on this slide here, you'll see the range of activities that we're working with. With CADF and CIHI, we're releasing a range of activities along the product development lifecycle to support various stages of decision making and the varying data needs that come not just from the regulator, but from the HTA bodies and the public drug plans and other people that are making decisions within the system. And then with CIHR, we're launching 4 funding opportunities to support rare disease research. So in the early research and development stage, we're developing a pediatric clinical trial network to better support trials across the country and enable those trials in children, with children. We're also supporting a funding opportunity related to clinical trial readiness, bringing that product to a stage related to drug development. And we're working with CADF to better understand what's coming down the pipeline through a horizon scanning type initiative to better understand how the system might need to adapt, either through changes in pediatric screening or newborn screening or other types of activities to support the eventual introduction of products within the system. We're also working with our regulatory and HTA bodies to improve the business intelligence around the decision-making process. So we're working with CADF to better understand disease-based registries in the rare disease space as part of the real-world evidence work that Fiona briefly mentioned. CADF is continuing that work of assessing what registries are out there, the quality associated with them, in an effort to build more standards and essentially a harmonization process of the data that is available within those registries to eventually get to a point where we can build the capacity to reach those standards in Canada. CIHI is also working to develop a drug plan and a formulary tool to understand better coverage decisions across the country. And we're working with CADA to develop in their review capacity to be able to look at novel drugs, potentially in a more innovative or novel way, beyond the traditional kind of HTA approaches. And then in the screening and diagnostic space, we're working with CADA to better understand the newborn screening programming across the country in an effort to build best practices and consistency in that space, and also supporting CIHR to support sort of novel developments related to genomics and its use in the diagnostic process, potentially earlier in the process, to reduce that diagnostic odyssey for patients. And this really builds from other initiatives supported by Genome Canada in that space. And then in the final, once the drugs are to people, we want to be able to continue to monitor that ongoing use. So CADF and CIHI are working together to look at linking the administrative databases that CIHI has and the information and the wealth of information that's there with the registry information that we're looking at in the real world evidence space. And we're also working with CIHR to better understand how we can look at the administrative databases that we have to answer questions related to optimizing the long-term health of patients. So the next stages for the strategy are really to work with our provinces and territories to advance a small set of new and emerging drugs that could be cost shared and covered in a consistent way across the country. And that's one small element of the agreements that we're coming up with PTs. We're also working to develop consistency in screening and diagnosis, as well as supporting coverage for existing drugs for rare diseases. And then we're also continuing to work with patients, clinicians, private and public drug plans, the pharmaceutical industry in an effort to implement the strategy. And so in the coming weeks, we're proud to be announcing the establishment of our implementation advisory group and what they'll be doing to better support the next stages of the strategy. But of course, this targeted investment in rare diseases really just supplements and what is a broader wealth of work going on at the national level to be able to support drugs for rare diseases, as well as drugs more broadly that are innovative and useful and needed and meeting unmet patient needs for, across the country. So Health Canada does have a pediatric drug action plan in place with a series of activities to try to improve and encourage the number of drugs coming to Canada with a pediatric indication and trying to incentivize that kind of research. We also have the biomanufacturing and life sciences strategy, which came out of COVID, but is now reaching a much broader range to try to support cell and gene therapy more broadly, trying to develop the capacity within Canada for these types of therapies, as well as the research and development associated with them. My division is working to stand up a Canadian drug agency and trying to support national pharmacare. So we're looking to create legislation specific to pharmacare in the very near future, as well as what the functions of a Canadian drug agency could be to better support appropriate use, data and analytics, and pricing negotiation within the country. And then we have a pan-Canadian genomics strategy, which again is looking at the use of genomics within various aspects of various industries as well, health being one of them, and how we can better support that. And health data is currently being worked on as well at a national level, in addition to looking at pharmaceutical data specifically. And then through the National Research Council of Canada, we also have some very interesting challenges programming related to cell and gene therapy, and trying to better design and develop those technologies within Canada. So there's some links to all of those things. Can't obviously speak to them, but really trying to support rare disease and research generally to build access to these products for patients and to create Canada as a place where manufacturers would like to bring those products. So that's it for my slides, and Fiona's happy to answer any questions you might have.
Do you have any questions from the audience? I have one. I know that you all have touched on this a little bit in your slides, but I want to, realizing, you know, that rare diseases are a global, you know, issue. How do you all work well together, and how do you connect on strategies to advance drug development in various PEDS rare diseases? Because you mentioned PEDS quite a bit. I can inject that, but rare diseases in general, but PEDS as well.
Who goes first?
Christina, you spoke up. You're
I
first.
get to start. I get to start.
They said not it, so it was.
Okay. I was just now thinking, because actually we have, I mean, we work quite closely together. And one of the things that we have is that we have what's called clusters between the agencies. And we do have one specific on rare diseases. And this cluster is between the EMA, FDA, and Health Canada. So once a month, we have a call, discuss various topics. It can be a product under marketing authorization. It can be discussions on some advice given, or indeed methodology to be used. So I personally find those very interesting, and it's also really, really beneficial to hear colleagues' views on how to best do the development and what is also acceptable in the various jurisdictions. So that's one possibility that we have, for example, to work together.
Yeah, the clusters is a great one because it's a very deep dive into the data. I think the other one I would mention is we work together on ICH, and so it's the opposite approach where we go to the principles that we can all agree to, and we write international guidance documents. And so ICH is the International Coalition for Harmonization and Regulatory, never going to get that acronym right, but essentially it does 3 levels of guidance documents, one focusing on quality, one focusing on safety, and then one focusing on efficacy. And so each time there's a new leap forward, say if it's statistical analysis and how do we want to handle Bayesian reviews of data, they'll write an ICH statistical approaches document. And then this can become principles that all of the regulators, EMA, FDA, Health Canada can agree to. And so it helps ground a lot of our work moving forward into those deeper dives as well.
Thank you. For sake of time, we'll if there's any questions, we'll go to the next session. But I really wanted to thank each of you for participating in the session. I enjoyed our conversations recently, and I myself will be following up with you to further conversations about collaborations. Thank you.